Thank you for joining us today. I'm Nicole Buchanan, and I want to give you a little bit of the history behind how Research to Share began and where we hope to be going in the future. So about 18 months ago, Dionne Stephens, who is our wonderful speaker today, Kim Case, and I were sitting around at a SPICY conference talking about all of the barriers we faced in trying to get our research out into the world. And that led into a conversation about how can we help other scholars move their research and get it out into the world as well. And in particular, we wanted to reach those scholars who may not have the research funds to travel to a lot of conferences and to really build their network. And those things are becoming increasingly important for getting tenure and for further promotion, even at smaller institutions. So how do we help people build that when they're also struggling? Sorry about that. I thought somebody was trying to talk to me. And so we wanted to both merge helping people figure out how to bring their research to the public and get that dissemination, as well as helping researchers who don't often have easy access to doing these kinds of things. And we realized that between the three of us, we all had different areas of expertise on using digital platforms to our advantage and being able to promote our research that way. So thankfully, APA's Commission on Ethnic Minority Recruitment, Retention, and Training in Psychology Task Force agreed, and they decided to fund our venture, which provided the resources to create the platform and the infrastructure that has brought us to this webinar today. So as you know, getting funds like this and continuing funds for these kinds of ventures requires evidence that it's actually making a difference. And although it's not required, it would be much appreciated if you took our preliminary survey on how you're already using digital and social media to promote your research. And then we'll have follow-up surveys over time to see if the resources we're talking about are making a difference and helping. So the URL is on our researchtoshare.com website. I'll also post it in the comments in a couple of minutes. And it would be really helpful if you have already logged into your social media accounts and maybe have a copy of your CV, because we're going to ask you things like how many followers do you have and how many publications or presentations have you done. On our Research to Share website, you will also see our lineup for our upcoming webinars, which are going to be absolutely amazing. We have a diverse group of speakers that are going to talk about a variety of different topics on outreach to the public and dissemination efforts and a lot of different platforms, even things like writing op-eds. We also hope that you'll use our website as a way to do some networking and connecting with one another and promoting your research. And we ask that when you do promote your research, that you use the hashtag research2share, and that's 2 with the number 2, so that we can track how research is getting disseminated and we can report back to our funders that we're actually making a difference. So to quickly recap, shout out and thank you to the Commission on Ethnic Minority Recruitment, Retention, and Training in Psychology Task Force for funding this work. 2, I ask that you take our survey, and if you've already done so, thank you. And if not, if you do that as soon as possible so we can capture where you are at the start of this journey. And we ask that when you promote your own research in any kind of digital platform, that you use the hashtag research2share so that we can begin to track how this is going and how it's growing over time. So again, thank you for embarking on this journey with us. We're incredibly, incredibly excited. And I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Dionne Stephens, who is a master at being able to cultivate her brand, cultivate how she is seen, and using these digital platforms to market herself, and her work. So Dionne, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I don't know if that's actually accurate, but I appreciate you framing it that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually shift the screen so that you can see my presentation. So what I want to do is start off by just saying that this presentation, Owning Your Assets in Digital Identity, really sort of stemmed from a lot of my own interest in research. And what I want to start off by saying is that I'm going to be talking about social media today. But again, Research to Share is really looking at our digital identities across multiple platforms. So, for example, as Nicole said earlier, some of the webinars coming up will be talking about writing op-ed pieces, giving TED Talks, using Twitter. And so we'll be talking about that, but I wanted to start off by focusing on something that I'm sure everybody uses, and that's something that we all engage in just to get started, and that's the use of social media specifically. And I think it's something that's important to think about because almost all of us at least probably have a Facebook page. I'd be surprised everybody doesn't have one. You might not use it, But at some point, people have had a Facebook page, and then YouTube is highly popular, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, if you're traveling, of course, Snapchat, Facebook Messenger, and web chat. These are just some of the social media platforms that are out there right now. And again, their usage depends on what people are using it for. Your age has a big impact on it. So for example, you'll hear probably if you have students that are under the age of 30, Facebook is not as popular. It's the average age of Facebook users now are 40. But you'll see that all of these are really common tools that are being used. So the reason why I got into this was I'm an associate professor of psychology at Florida International in Miami. And one of the things that I found was that it was important for me to use social media to connect with other people across the fields and who do work similar to me. Because I do have colleagues that do some work here, but a lot of my invisible college or my academic tribe, both of them, are more national. So what I found by using social media, it was really exciting to see what others were using and making connections in terms of their daily work and research. But even if they lived at the other end of the country or other end of the country or in another country, I was able to really connect with them as people and around research topics. So I've learned really by stumbling along the way. And with social media, that's okay. You start off really small and then you build to what you want to grow your digital presence into. And I'm still building. But what I found was that when I'm talking about to other people, there's a lot of barriers, and a lot of the barriers are ourselves. And some of that is self-doubt, our fears around not having the skills, or even our own ownership of our expertise and willingness to put it out there. So my goal for today is to sort of encourage you to start taking stock of what you want to have as your digital identity and what your social media goals are, and to be intentional moving forward with social media in your career. And that's why this is the first step in the series of webinars to get you going. So really quickly today, I've broken it down into three categories. And again, this will be available later for you to go through to look back at. And so first, we're going to talk about defining our digital spaces. And then I want to move into reclaiming and redefining our current digital identities. And then the last step is actually owning your space. So the first thing that's related to defining your digital identity is really sort of looking at it in terms of underrepresented ethnic minority faculty or scholars' needs. And I think that's what's a really sort of critical piece around doing this. Because we already know that social media is being widely used already in academia. So this is now where you find jobs. It's posted on websites. If you're on Facebook, people are saying, look, there's a job coming up. We're using it to post to ask research questions if you use ResearchGate or Academia, Academic Net. A lot of us are also managing data via social media or online tools. This is also creating little online groups, support networks or research networks, publicizing events, accessing digital collections and research materials. So as academics, we've already started engaging in social media in various ways. In terms of intentional, there's been very little research. The one study I found that was closest to looking at scholars' use of social media in terms of their own research was a study by Jarring and Back that was done in 2017. And what they did find is that if you're looking at here, the blue and the red are the key in this first slide here, is that they are finding that researchers, when they're thinking about in terms of their own scholarship, are following social media accounts that are tied to their research and research development. And they will like content, so they are engaging in some level with content that they think is relevant to their own. They're not necessarily commenting though. So they might not be initiating a discussion, but they are following and sort of being passively engaged with social media as it relates to their research. They also found that social media is mixed in terms of people being well connected. But they are finding that overall people do think that there's a concrete benefit to their own research or their work for being active in social media. And it does help them stay in contact with their business-related or research-related contacts. So there is some research showing that this is something that we have to do if you're doing scholarship. And increasingly, I'm sure a lot of you are getting emails and getting information from your universities or institutions. Social media is now really critical. So this is a great quote, I thought, from the University of Nottingham's graduate school, that they've really sort of been intentional in pushing their faculty and staff to start using social media, and or as they call it, participatory media, in terms of bringing their research out, networking and collaborating. So I'm seeing these messages. We have Twitter for our universities, we have Facebook pages, we have all these different things that exist. But one of the things that we're finding is that where do we start? And also, what are the unique factors around bringing ourselves into social media as scholars, and particularly as underrepresented and ethnic minority scholars? And this is critically important when we're thinking about it in terms of our careers, because this is actually a place of putting ourselves out there and gaining expertise recognition and informed self-promotion. And that kind of goes against what we're taught about how academia works. It's this notion that when we work hard, our good work will stand on its own and there's no need to advertise or talk about it. But the reality is we know that's not true. There's all this research on implicit bias, how people network, self and peer citing practices, nepotism. All of these are tied into our ability to be productive and gain recognition for our work. So there is a need for us to engage in social media and promote ourselves. And the reason why it's also really a great tool for underrepresented ethnic minorities is that we can harness it ourselves. We're not relying on others. We're not relying on just our department or peers in the department to do this. We can now build our network and build our identity more broadly and start improving the ways in which our research is being seen and increase our visibility. But I do want to acknowledge really quickly that there are three ways that are making it difficult for underrepresented ethnic minority faculty to connect outside of social media. And the first one is access to resources. And we already know that in terms of resources, whether it's economic or social, underrepresented faculty receive less mentoring, tend to have less networks. Also, if you're working at a teaching institution or minority serving institution, we have fewer access, we have less access to institutional resources that can help us gain national prominence, which again is tied to having resources like being able to travel to conferences, even having systems in place to network and increase, and this might increase our reliance on other partnerships with people who have resources, so we really don't get to shape our identity. So we're at a disadvantage for creating a research platform and gaining visibility, which is really necessary for promotion and tenure. So using social media gives us a way to sort of access resources or connect with people who are doing similar research to help us get resources and build relationships in a different way. The next way that's important is the research foci. So you find for women and people of color, the research shows, are more likely to pursue non-traditional research. And often this marginalization of our topics are discredited, particularly for focusing on minority issues. And I'm not sure how many of you looked recently at the National Institute for Health. Dr. Michael Lauder, he's the NIH Deputy Director for Extramural Funding. He has every month he writes an opinion piece. And this month he actually was referencing an article in Science Advances, which was titled Topic Choices Contribute to the Lower Rate of NIH Awards to African American Black Scientists. And basically what they were finding with this study, and it's something that the NIH, he's acknowledging, which I think is great, is that one of the major barriers to, in this case, it's specifically Black researchers' productivity and ability to gain funding and be recognized as experts is their topic choice. So they found that Black applicants for funding were more likely to be associated with certain topics that were less funded than others. And even these were tended to be community and population level research. And even when there were white researchers studying the same thing, they were also less likely to be funded, but not to the same degree. So what they're not acknowledging here is that the topics that underrepresented and ethnic minority faculty often do are not viewed as part of the traditional frameworks of academia, so they aren't being recognized in the same way, which means we might not be getting the same attention, not be getting the same visibility from the same spaces that others are that will help them in terms of productivity and promotion. So again, this is another reason why social media, that's something that we can harness ourselves, is critically important. And then finally, again, I've kind of already tied into this, are the networks. And networks are crucial across the board for many aspects of being successful in academia. And we already know it's tied to funding, developing research projects, also just being included in the field. So just having social media accounts, which we already know, are critical for helping us build networks and connect with others. And I'll talk about the ways in which social media can help us do that. So I've really presented some kind of negative frameworks where you're just like, oh my God, why am I even dealing with this? But it's really important that we start reclaiming and taking ownership of our social capital in academia, and particularly using social media. Now, again, I recognize that this idea of self-promotion seems really uncomfortable. Clearly, we need to do it, and we can see that its impact, if we're not visible, if we're not out there, if we're not connecting, has an impact on our job. But we also know that there are sort of negative frameworks and negative attitudes towards people who do this. And what we recognize with social media is that we're not necessarily seeing the real person. And so often people frame them as being egotistical and self-centered. And in fact, studies primarily when we're looking at comparing men and women, we know that women who self-promote are seen less favorably than men who self-promote. And when women do this self-promotion, they're seen as lacking competence and being less assertive if they don't. So it's like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So this idea of self-promotion on social media really becomes a difficult issue to address. So I want to shift the way we think about it and say that we're not going to think about it as self-promotion, but we're reclaiming our social capital and the ways in which we can use our social capital on social media to be an advocate. And we now have the APA backing us on this, because there's this huge movement which was led by APA President Jessica Henderson Daniel, which is a citizen psychologist. And I think if we start thinking of ourselves as citizen psychologists when we're in social media, that's really going to help us really think strategically about the ways in which we can create our digital identity in a way that gives us personal satisfaction, but also career productivity and benefits and visibility. So the Citizen Psychologist is an initiative that sought to, and it continues to, really push the importance of the citizen psychologist movement, and particularly pushing towards the next generation psychologist, in that the research we do has to be applicable to the real world. And that's through community programming, legislation, and really focusing on improving lives just outside of the ivory tower in really concrete ways. And so if we start thinking about it this way, it really shifts the way we're going to think about our digital identities. So it takes the self out of self-promotion, and we have to start thinking about ourselves now as engaged contributors in terms of how we're contributing to academia. And so what we can find by doing this is that we're enacting advocacy in action, and we're contributing to a larger culture. So it's more of a dynamic space that we're engaging in here. So we can not just dwell on how great we are, but we're looking at the ways in which what we're doing really also supports what's going on with others. So we're contributing to a larger culture and a larger audience. It's also critical to note that this is not just a one-way self-promotion. We're also going to be connecting and thinking about, how does our work assist others? How is what we're sharing going to really reach values and objectives that we want to do that's more about connectivity? And through this, it's helping us nurture relationships. So you're not, again, sort of selling yourself, but you're lending yourself into the conversations, you're asking questions and sharing insights through your engagement in social media. And you're bringing your expertise in terms of your scholarship into real-world discussions. So we've kind of reframed how we're looking at ourselves and promoting and being more of an advocate or a citizen psychologist, but now we want to sort of do it in a concrete way in terms of reclaiming and re-identifying how we're presented. So the first thing is, everyone should have at this point started taking stock of, what do you look like online? How visible are you? How can people reach you? And think about also in terms of privacy and public settings. So when you Google yourself, what pops up? What kinds of pictures? And if you were someone from the outside, what does your digital identity say about you as a citizen psychologist? So are your expertise, is your research knowledge, and all the things that make you who you are, and in terms of your skills out there, is it being showcased? And is it relevant to where you are right now? And how will it play out later on as you're thinking longer term? So when you're thinking about that, you have to think about also, well, why am I even caring about this? So why are you interested in shifting or even sort of re-articulating your digital identity? And so this is something you have to start questioning, and it's not something you have to answer right away, and it's going to constantly change, and that's okay. The next piece is also, which is critical, is, do you have the tools, time, and skills to provide content that really makes you a engaged and really useful citizen psychologist. And this is something that you have to also think about, and we'll talk about later on in terms of platforms and how you're going to look at it. So also, are you thinking long-term or short-term in terms of your goals and what's fitting into your professional realities and in terms of your personal goals? So all of these sort of prioritizing your digital identity needs to be thought about before you just jump right in. And one more piece that I think is critical too is your identity affiliation. So I'm assuming that most people in participating in these webinars are somehow affiliated to psychology scholarship or the field of academia in some way, or the broader field of psychology. But if you're affiliated with an organization, you have to think about how do you want to brand yourself in terms of your identity affiliations. And you have to think about it in terms of, is it going to be an institutional digital identity? Is it going to be a mix of the institutional and personal identity, or is it going to be, which would be your institutional role? Or is it just going to be your personal identity? So when you are linked to an institution, it does bring some level of credibility. Usually institutions have resources to help you develop your social media identity, such as a server to support things, support staff, training and equipment. And also if things arise, particularly for underrepresented ethnic minorities, around backlash around your work, especially during these political times, if it's an institutional identity, they're more likely to provide support for you around political issues, whether it's legal, whether it's how to deal with media responses, etc. However, if you are going to integrate the institution and it's your role at the institution into your digital identity, that means everything you do will have to stay affiliated with that institution even when you leave. And then you're also going to have to operate within their social media and communication policies. So you might not have a greater level of freedom to speak on certain issues if you're affiliated or tied to an institution. Also, if you do it by yourself, you can create some sort of really cool username or vanity URL, as they would call it. So these are things to think about in terms of the pros and cons across these three models of how you want to think about your digital identity. And again, it could fit. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be changed over time, and then also depends on your media platform. So I, for example, have my own website, which is mine, that's not affiliated with the university, and there's very little links to indicate my university affiliation. However, on my Facebook page, which is affiliated with being faculty at my institution, there is a link to go to my personal page. A lot of this will depend on your relationship with your institution, what your institution's policies are, and again, what your goals are around this. The next big thing I want to talk about then, which is really sort of then moving into, stepping into really taking concrete steps towards your digital identity, is starting to own your space. And I call this sort of developing a social media space strategy. And the space is really sort of critical in terms of it provides 5 levels or 5 steps that you should engage in. And again, I want to stress that they don't have to be done in this order, but they all need to be done in terms of developing a social media strategy. So the first thing is you want to scope out the various content and social media options and information out there, and you're really intentional about that versus just seeing what's out there about you and what could be done. So this is a bit more intentional. Then you want to identify what kind of platform you're going to use. Define your audience. Consider what will be your content, not only in terms of what you're going to write about, but how you're going to write it and what tools you're going to use. And then be intentional in your engagement. So when I said to scope out intentionally, you've kind of, hopefully at the first stage I said earlier, looking at what's out there about yourself. Well, now you've gone through the other steps of thinking about, well, what do you want your digital identity to look like? How does it play out? What are your affiliations? Now you're going to start observing what's out there. So that might even be looking at other people's websites. That's what I did, is I looked at people who do similar work, who are at my institution, at other institutions, and start observing what's happening and what would fit and work for you in a really sort of concrete, strategic manner. Then start participating, start engaging and building connections, and start seeing what other people are doing, liking pages, start identifying who you'd want to network. And then engage in empowered engagement. So this is where, you're hearing me using the word intentional, but it's where you're really intentional about being a citizen psychologist. So you're coming from a position where you're contributing in a real sort of thought out process, and really sort of thinking about long-term how your digital identity is going to play out in the psychologist framework. So when you're thinking about your space strategies, you should think about how you're going to want to share news, what you want to do, like what is it that you want to do in terms of meeting where you want to go with your research. So beyond that, next will be your platform. And I'm just going to talk about 5 platforms here because I think these are the easiest ones to do. But very quickly, what are the pros and cons? I don't think you should do all at once because it's very overwhelming. But you start off with the one that you're most comfortable with and build on them. So again, you can use all, and I've probably used all but one right now, and they're integrated across. But I started off with one and then started building as I got more and more comfortable. So the first thing is our websites. And usually if you're affiliated with an institution, you'll have one. But the issue depends on what's content's allowed. So at my institution right now, they really haven't dictated what content we need to use. So I've been able to use my own content for my website. I also had some background training in using Dreamweaver. So I had some graphic training, so I was able to buy a template and do a lot of controlling of what I want. And I'm able then to host it on my server. But if you don't have all of those things and you don't have the training, you don't want to put your time into doing that now, because I wouldn't go back and learn Dreamweaver now because it's very intense. But if I had to do it now, you can look at other types of software that's available if you're not using your institution. I personally love Wix and Foursquare because if you can use Word or you can use PowerPoint, you can design a website very easy. They have templates and it's very easy to use. However, you're going to have to pay for those. It'll cost you anywhere, depending if you catch a sale, from $70 to $100 a year. But again, if you have funding, you can maybe include it in part of your funding. But again, like institutional sites, when you leave, it's tied to that platform. So that's something to think about. But again, if you're using it, you have to think about websites in terms of the financial and professional legal hosting issues. And it is, again, a lot of time up front creating these websites, and you need to keep updating them regularly. People, if they go to your website, it's not updated, they're going to stop going. And I do also want to stress that one thing that my students told me was that they look at websites, and if the websites for a faculty member seems old, they tend to view it as a faculty member that's not very active or engaged. So think about who your website is for and how they're going to look at it in terms of your ability to maintain it and what content you use. Now, blogs are also pretty common. So it's written content that's usually written in an informal or conversational style. These are precursors to the podcast or vlogging, and I'll talk about that later on. But blogs can also be incorporated to websites, and usually, again, you'd have to use like a website page. But again, you have to think about it in terms of expanding your online presence through positive conversation. And it's a great way to showcase your research and expertise, and really from an authoritative and expertise standpoint. Now, it's time consuming, and you have to constantly keep fresh content. And you have to also figure out ways to attract viewers on your own, because why would I go to your blog? So blogging is one thing that you probably need to connect with one of your other social media platforms. So a lot of people like to jump into blogging because they have something to say, but this goes back to, again, being intentional about how you want to present yourself and where you want to put your time around your digital identity. And again, it also needs regular updates. I personally think the easiest place to start is on Facebook. So it's really easy to connect and be in touch with your invisible college or your academic tribe on a really personal level. And also through this, you'll start connecting with other people because they'll see who's your friends, there'll be suggestions. And I look at mine, that's how I got connected to some people I've never met, but I've seen their work or they're friends with another friend. So it really helps visitors see what others are saying about your work and helps you expand your network with very little effort. But what I would suggest is that, again, it needs regular updates, and you have to determine the line between professional and personal content. I personally have 2 separate pages. So I have my Dionne Stephens faculty page, which really focuses on more of my research and professional values and belief systems. And then I have my personal one where the name is slightly changed, and that's where my family posts their family reunion stuff, or, you know, the latest things with my sisters, my nieces, and my nephews, etc. So some people are on both, but I do have them separated because I also don't necessarily want my undergraduate students on my personal page. I have colleagues, though, that use it for both. But this is something, again, you want to think about in terms of where you are with your digital identity, where you are with your career, and what your long-term goals are. And then the last one I want to talk about here is Twitter. And this is really a great tool, and you're seeing it increasingly at conferences, that people are telling you to tweet the conference. I was just at the National Latinx Psychological Association. Everything was hashtag NLPA. SPICY, you see the same thing too. And so being on Twitter is another great way to connect with other people. And we have, of course, research to share hashtag, and let people see what you're doing with your research and your identity. So it's an easy way to build upon your relevant work to a wider world, and it's only 140 characters. So you don't have to put that much time into it, but you can really sort of showcase your interests and quickly draw people to other aspects of your social media. Again, it is a short character limit, but that makes it a bit easier to sort of maintain as part of your identity. But again, you have to regularly update, because if you don't tweet often, people are not going to keep up with you. I did forget one more that I did want to talk about, and that's YouTube. And basically, this is where you upload and share videos. I now make sure I have a camera to videotape any lecture I have so I can post them onto YouTube. And it's a great way for people to see what my research is. For example, we're recording this. This is another great tool for letting people see what research it is. So you can showcase your work, showcase your lectures. People then can comment. It can be shared. You can then also use them as lecture tools in your other classes. So YouTube is another really popular social media tool that you should consider using in terms of your digital identity. However, it does require editing skills and some basic equipment. And this is one thing, fortunately, my students are really skilled at this, so they have to help me a lot with editing. In fact, yesterday I had one in here just like, I can't figure this out, and she sat down to do it. And again, you have to regularly update it. But it is a great way that you can post your content or even vlog, which is more engaging than just typing something and people reading it. And Becky, if you're trying to catch the younger generation, the video is a little bit more of an appropriate tool for catching that audience, which is my next conversation in terms of the space discussion, is the audience. And this is really critical. Who are you targeting this to? So if it's everybody in the world, that's a little bit harder. But if you're thinking about it in terms of your professional identity, you want to think about this in terms of, is it for people who are going to be colleagues, or is it for students? Are you trying to connect with other experts? Again, consider the demographics. What is the age group? What economic group are you targeting it to? What education? Because that's also going to change your language and what tools you look at. What kinds of affiliations? And also, are you looking at maybe trying to get media organizations? So one of my pages is really about building up consulting and really about media organizations, rather than what I want people to see in terms of my research expertise for doing lectures or giving some sort of collaborations around research. So this is really critical to think about your audience. You don't have to appeal to everyone. And also you want to think about it in terms of just posting everything and anything doesn't really get a lot of bang for your buck. So when you're doing social media and you're being intentional as a citizen psychologist, you really have to acknowledge and recognize what audience you're trying to reach out to and showcase in ways that will be interesting to them. This then, of course, ties into the content. And so you have to think about how, what kind of content are you using and what are you posting? Because you have to think about the fact that the content you're doing is really what's going to connect you. It's going to drive the traffic and your expertise and reputation. So if you're just posting announcements about yourself all the time, that's not going to have the same impact. And if you're just posting, like forwarding news articles that you see without putting any sort of commentary with it, that's not really giving any indication about how you critically think, how you can apply your research, and how to expand your network in ways that are really relevant to the type of work you're doing. So maybe you want to post to start conversations. You have to start thinking about it in a concrete way. And so some ways you could start thinking about it are you going to start commenting on current trends in the field? So I'm really interested in the ways in which mentoring occurs, or the ways in which the academia itself is shifting. And so I do post articles from, for example, the Chronicle of Higher Education, the New York Times. I'm also very careful in thinking about what resources I'm posting around these, and I make sure I make comments around that might not always be highly academic, but are relevant to my audience. Another thing I like to do is give peer promotion. So this is a way of also connecting with others. So if I do see someone else doing great work, I comment on it, or if they share something I like, I thank them for them sharing it originally and linking them in there. but it's also showing that I have these connective relationships. And I will say it does make an impact, because my grad student said, I actually saw that you're friends with this person. They shared this comment. You know, I saw they wrote this article. Can you connect me with them? So it told me that my students are also seeing and looking at me as a model of how they should make connections with other people. And they're recognizing that it is important to do this. Also, quick comments can highlight your expertise around things, and you can even engage in day-to-day discussions about things that have happened, but you did it in a way that's really sort of showcasing, again, your critical thinking and trying to be conversational around how you're doing it. Again, this depends on what tool you're using around this. And then finally, there's also upcoming activities. This is one of the ways we promoted this program, was by highlighting great events that are happening. If there are job opportunities, if there are certain types of gatherings, that's the type of thing that people will see what you're connected to, what you're tuned into, and it's a way of advocating, again, for things that are important. And sorry, the final things, again, are updates about what's happening, and then also you do want to talk about your achievements. You shouldn't have all of your content about it, but tie in some of your notable work and things that are coming up that would be of interest. So your latest publication, and even though it might not be something that people want to read because it's a lot of academic jargon, you can contextualize it in terms of it's relevant to the wider world. Or if you got an award and it's really important why this award was given to you and what it means, talk about it. And also the same thing is talk about others' achievements to build your network. And so finally, the next step is to engage. And again, these things don't have to happen in this order, but this is where you have to be really intentional about promoting yourself and your digital identity and social media. So everything you should do to link. So your website should link to your other social media page. You want to integrate all your social media tools, because what you'll find is that that helps increase your visibility and builds your network more broadly. And so I would also make sure you put it in your email signatures, on your business cards. Usually at the end of all my presentations, my slide has all of my key links that I would want people to see depending on what audience it is. And then also like and actually reach out and be friends with people who are doing similar research or have similar expertise. But again, the key is that you have to update and post content frequently. And when I say frequently, it doesn't mean every day, but you have to show that you're engaged. And this is another form of your productivity and extension of your research identity. So just some final thoughts here that I want you to think about is that this is not a fixed activity. It's not like writing a manuscript that you write, it gets reviewed, you get feedback, you fix it, and then it's published, and that's it. It's an ongoing thing that will change. So there are short-term and long-term goals. But the big thing that's critically important is establishing yourself as the expert, because you want to make sure that you're seen as someone who is credible, and more importantly, you're acknowledged for the work you do and acknowledged for your skills and expertise around this. But within this, it's important to build trust and credibility. That means that you want people to recognize that you actually know what you're talking about, you come from an informed perspective, and you actually really want to make change around things, and you become the credible voice. And this ties into making sure you provide valuable content. So think really critically about what you're doing, and again, be intentional. But I think the most important piece is to just be enthusiastic and genuine. You can see people who are very successful in terms of how they are online is usually exactly how they are when you meet them. And so when you're thinking about your digital identity, think about it as an extension of who you are and your expertise. But it's a bit more personalized than just sort of your typical scholarship or your academic or researcher identity. So these are the things that you have to sort of shift when you're thinking about your role in shaping your digital identity and your goals on social media. So those were sort of the big picture pieces that I wanted to talk about.